Right now, somewhere within a few miles of your home, a grocery store shelf is a little thinner than it was last month. Not empty, not alarming, just thinner. A small gap where there didn't used to be one. A shelf tag still in place, but nothing behind it. A product you've bought 100 times that simply isn't there today. Most people walk past it without a second thought. And that is exactly why it matters. Because that gap, that small, easy to ignore, completely unremarkable gap, is how every shortage begins. Not with empty aisles, not with news cameras and parking lots, not with purchase limits and panicked crowds and social media floods. With a shelf that is slightly thinner than last week. Real shortages almost never announce themselves. They don't arrive with warnings. They don't send signals that are impossible to miss. They begin quietly, in the background, in places most consumers never think about, and they develop slowly enough that by the time most people notice them, the easy window for preparation has already closed. Today we are going to walk through exactly how that happens. Not as a prediction, not as a reason for fear, as a pattern, a structure that repeats itself across different products, different eras, different circumstances, with a consistency that once you understand it, you cannot unsee. The first thing worth knowing is that every shortage has two separate timelines running at the same time. There is the visible timeline, and there is the invisible timeline. The visible timeline is what most people remember. The empty shelves, the news coverage, the purchase limits, the frustrated shoppers, the social media photos of bare aisles. That is the timeline most people associate with the word shortage. But the invisible timeline is where the real story begins. It starts in places most consumers never see. Farms, factories, warehouses, shipping yards, distribution centers, transportation networks. The invisible infrastructure behind every product on every shelf in every store you have ever walked through. A single can of soup sitting on a grocery shelf represents a chain of events involving farmers, processors, packaging manufacturers, transportation providers, warehouse operators, and retail logistics teams. Every single step in that chain depends on every other step, and every single step introduces a potential point of failure. When one part of that chain weakens, the system does not immediately fail. That is the important thing to understand. It does not collapse. It does not stop. It becomes fragile. And a fragile system looks exactly like a healthy system right up until the moment it encounters stress it cannot absorb. Think about a bridge. A bridge does not collapse the moment a crack appears in one of its supports. The crack can exist for months, for years. Traffic continues flowing. People cross every single day. Life goes on completely normally. The bridge still works, but the margin for error has gotten smaller. The buffer between functional and failing has quietly shrunk. And the system that looked perfectly healthy from the outside is now carrying the same load with less structural capacity than it had before. Supply chains operate exactly the same way. A shortage often begins not when something breaks completely, but when margins shrink. Less inventory buffer at each stage of the chain. Less redundancy in supplier relationships. Less flexibility in transportation capacity. Less room to absorb an unexpected spike in demand or an unexpected drop in supply. The shelves still look full. The system still appears healthy. But behind what the consumer sees, the bridge has a crack. This is where the visible shortage begins to form, long before anyone can see it. Then the first warning signs appear. And here is where most people make the mistake that costs them the most. The warning signs are subtle. They are easy to explain away. A product disappears from a shelf temporarily. A store employee mentions a delayed shipment. A price ticks up slightly faster than usual. A shelf that used to be full to the back now has products only in the front row. Each individual signal sounds reasonable. A delayed shipment. A supplier issue. Some bad weather affecting a transportation route. A factory running behind on maintenance. Every explanation sounds temporary. Every explanation sounds like something that will resolve itself in a week or two. And that is precisely the problem. Shortages rarely announce their own severity. They emerge gradually. One missing product becomes three. Three become an entire shelf section. A shelf section becomes a category. By the time the pattern becomes undeniably obvious, the window for calm, affordable, unhurried preparation has already closed. Human beings are naturally vulnerable to what psychologists call normalcy bias. It is the deeply ingrained tendency to assume that tomorrow will look essentially like yesterday. that the systems we depend on will continue functioning because they have always functioned. That availability today means availability tomorrow. That a full shelf this week means a full shelf next month. Normalcy bias is useful most of the time. We cannot function if we constantly question every system we rely on. But during periods when those systems are quietly weakening, normalcy bias becomes a blind spot. It causes us to rationalize the early warning signs as temporary. It causes us to delay action until the evidence is overwhelming. It causes us to reach stage 4, the public discovery stage, without any buffer at all, competing with everyone else at the worst possible moment. One of the clearest examples of this dynamic happened in the early months of 2020. People remember the empty toilet paper shelves. What most people don't remember is that those shelves didn't empty overnight. The system was strained by a sudden, massive, simultaneous shift in consumer behavior. Demand surged. Production capacity couldn't adjust quickly enough. The shortage wasn't caused by a failure to manufacture toilet paper. It was caused by a mismatch between what consumers suddenly wanted and what the supply chain could deliver at that speed. And that introduces one of the most important lessons in this entire discussion. Many shortages don't begin with a supply failure. They begin with a behavior shift. Once enough people believe a product might become scarce, their buying behavior changes. Someone buys 2 instead of 1. Then 10 people make that decision. Then 1,000. Then 100,000. The behavior that makes perfect sense for each individual creates a collective outcome that accelerates the very shortage everyone was trying to protect against. The perception of scarcity creates actual scarcity. We have seen this pattern play out with fuel, food, medicine, household supplies, and dozens of other product categories across modern history. The specific product changes every time. The specific cause changes. The specific geography changes. But the underlying structure remains remarkably, almost uncomfortably, familiar. And that familiarity is useful, because a pattern that repeats can be anticipated. A structure that is consistent can be recognized early. And recognizing it early is where all the practical advantage lives. Here is something else worth understanding about why the system is more vulnerable today than it has ever been. Modern supply chains are extraordinarily efficient, and that efficiency is genuinely impressive. It has lowered costs, reduced waste, and made products available at prices that would have seemed impossible a few generations ago. But efficiency and resilience are not the same thing. They are often in direct tension with each other. For decades, supply chain optimization has focused on removing redundancy. Just-in-time inventory systems became the standard. Warehouses reduced their buffer stock. Suppliers consolidated. Transportation networks were streamlined. Every unnecessary unit of inventory, every extra supplier relationship, every redundant distribution point was treated as waste to be eliminated. Under normal conditions, that optimization works beautifully. Under abnormal conditions, it fails visibly because there is no buffer left to absorb the disruption. A system optimized for efficiency has traded resilience for performance. It runs perfectly when everything goes according to plan. It has very little capacity left for when things don't. And disruptions, by definition, are things that don't go according to plan. This brings us to the stage that most people experience as the beginning of a shortage, even though it is actually closer to the middle. The awareness phase. This is when the signals that were subtle in the early stages become impossible to ignore. Friends start mentioning that a product is hard to find. Coworkers talk about rising prices. Local news runs a story. Social media posts start circulating with photos of thin shelves and empty sections. The information that was quietly available to anyone paying careful attention suddenly becomes part of general conversation. At this point, the dynamics change significantly. People who weren't paying attention start paying attention. People who weren't concerned become concerned. Buying behavior shifts at scale. Demand increases further just as supply is already under pressure. The window for easy, calm, affordable preparation begins closing rapidly. And here is what makes this stage so frustrating in hindsight. By the time most people reach the awareness phase, the people who were already prepared are barely affected. They built their buffer weeks or months earlier. They bought at normal prices. They bought without competition. They bought calmly, without urgency, without stress. And now they are watching the awareness phase unfold from a position of security rather than scrambling. The difference between those two positions is almost never a dramatic difference in resources or knowledge or capability. It is almost always a difference in timing, in whether you noticed the early signals or waited for the obvious ones. One of the most common mistakes people make is waiting for certainty before acting. They want confirmation. They want official acknowledgement. They want someone in authority to announce that yes, a shortage is real before they adjust their behavior. But certainty almost always arrives late. By the time everyone agrees that a shortage is real, the shelves already reflect it. The time to act on information about a shortage is before the shortage is certain, not after. Because after certainty arrives, you are no longer preparing. You are competing. Preparedness is not about certainty. It is about probability. It is about recognizing a familiar pattern early enough to act, while acting is still easy. Consider what happens with food prices specifically, because this is where the invisible timeline becomes most visible to most people. Long before consumers notice dramatic price increases at the register, producers have already been experiencing cost pressure for months. Fuel costs rise. Fertilizer prices climb. Labor costs increase. Transportation rates go up. Packaging materials get more expensive. Each of those pressures moves through the system gradually, stage by stage, until the accumulated cost eventually reaches the price tag the consumer sees. What looks sudden at the consumer level has almost always been developing slowly for a long time at the production level. The visible result at the shelf is the final chapter of a story that started months earlier, not the first chapter. The same principle applies across almost every industry, every product, every supply chain. The visible result is rarely the beginning. It is almost always the end. Then comes the public discovery phase. This is the stage most people mistake for the beginning of a shortage. The headlines arrive. Coverage expands. Everyone is talking about it. Social media is full of photos and reactions and opinions. Purchase limits get announced. Store employees are overwhelmed with questions they cannot answer because they genuinely don't know when normal inventory will return. But here is the hard truth about the public discovery phase. The shortage has usually been building for months before this moment. The early signals were there. The invisible fragility was there. The behavior shift was already underway. The public is not discovering the beginning of a problem. The public is discovering the conclusion of a process that has been running in the background since before anyone was paying attention. That distinction matters enormously, because it means that the time to prepare is not when the story goes public. The time to prepare is when the story is still invisible, when the shelf is just slightly thinner, when the price has just moved a little faster than usual, when the store employee gives an answer that sounds slightly less certain than it used to. The people who navigate disruptions most effectively are almost never the ones who reacted fastest after the public discovery phase. They are the people who noticed the signals in the early stages and took small, quiet, unhurried actions while everything still looked mostly fine. And here is what those small actions actually look like in practice, because this is the part most people never hear explained clearly. Preparedness at this level does not require dramatic action. It does not require fear. It does not require spending significantly more than your normal budget or making sweeping changes to how you live. It requires something far simpler and far more sustainable. It requires building a small buffer. A buffer is not a stockpile. A stockpile is a large quantity of goods acquired all at once in response to a perceived emergency. A buffer is a modest additional quantity of goods maintained as a routine part of normal household management. The difference is not just in quantity. It is in psychology, in cost, and in function. A buffer requires no crisis to justify it. It doesn't require you to believe something catastrophic is coming. It requires only the understanding that disruptions are a normal, periodic feature of complex systems, that acting early is cheaper and calmer than acting late, and that maintaining a small additional supply of the things you regularly use costs almost nothing relative to the options it creates when you need them. 2 extra cans of the products you use regularly. 1 additional week of staples. A modest extra supply of the items you noticed have been showing early signals. Added gradually over normal shopping trips, at normal prices, without competition, without urgency. That is the entire intervention. Over months, those small additions build into something meaningful. A household with that buffer enters any disruption at the early signal stage rather than the public discovery stage. The buffer absorbs the first weeks of the disruption while the system is still figuring out how to respond. The people inside that household are not standing in lines. They are not paying crisis prices. They are not making reactive decisions under stress. They have time, and time is the single most valuable resource in any disruption. Time allows calm decisions. Time allows gradual response. Time allows you to observe the situation clearly without the pressure of immediate need driving every choice. That breathing room is what quiet preparation creates. Not a bunker, not a warehouse, not a dramatic lifestyle change. A small buffer in the time it buys. Let's bring this back to where we started. You are in a grocery store. A shelf is slightly thinner than it was last month. You notice it now because you have learned to pay attention. You think about what you know about the supply chain behind that product. You consider whether this is showing up at other stores or just this one. You recall something you read recently about cost pressures in that category. You don't panic. You don't fill your cart with 30 units. You don't make any dramatic decision at all. You buy 3 instead of 1. You make a mental note to pay attention to that category over the next few weeks. You add it to your awareness, not your anxiety. That is it. That is the complete response. Not expensive, not dramatic, not disruptive to your normal life in any meaningful way. But if that thin shelf turns out to be an early signal of something structural, that quiet, unhurried, uncrowded decision will have placed you in a fundamentally different position from anyone who waited for the news coverage to tell them there was a problem. The distance between prepared and unprepared is almost never what people imagine. It is not the distance between a bunker and an empty pantry. It is the distance between 2 extra cans and none. Between 1 extra week of staples and no buffer at all. Between someone who noticed the thin shelf in month 1 and someone who first heard about it from a headline in month 4. That distance is measured in small decisions made before they felt necessary. Every shortage starts the same way. Not with empty shelves. Not with panic. Not with headlines and news cameras and purchase limits. With a shelf that is slightly thinner than last month. With a price that moved a little faster than usual. With a store employee giving an answer that sounds just slightly less certain than it used to. Small signals. Easy to miss. Easy to explain away. Historically reliable. The people who notice them are not operating from fear. They are not preparing for catastrophe. They are not reorganizing their lives around worst-case scenarios. They are simply paying attention, acting quietly, building small margins of safety before those margins are needed. Because by the time you need resilience, it is already too late to build it. So the next time you walk through a grocery store, look at the shelves with a different kind of attention. Notice what has changed since last month. Notice what costs more than it did 6 months ago. Notice what appears less reliably than it used to. Notice what the store employees say when you ask about a product that isn't there. Maybe it's nothing. Sometimes it genuinely is. But sometimes those small observations are the first chapter of a story that most people won't read until the final chapter is already written. And those who notice the first chapter have something everyone else will eventually wish they had. Time. That is how every shortage starts. That is why it matters. And that is why the window you are standing in right now, while things still look mostly normal, while products are still available, while decisions can still be made calmly and without competition, is the most valuable window of all. It is open right now. What you do with it is entirely up to you. If this gave you something useful, subscribe and leave a comment below. Tell me what you have noticed in your local stores recently. What looks thinner? What costs more? What seems slightly different from a few months ago? Stay aware, stay prepared, and stay calm before the crisis.